Indiana is always marketed as the state of corn, racetracks, and peaceful little towns. But in this video, we're going to step into a very different Indiana. 10 of the most remote and unsettling towns in the state. Places the locals only talk about in a lowered voice. Deep in the woods, beneath the ground, and among forgotten hills are communities tied to strange outbreaks. Graveyards watched over by a caretaker from another world, buried wartime experiments, and towns that even Google Maps seems to sidestep. This is a list of 10 towns that people in Indiana talk about from real experience, not ghost stories made up for fun. If you're calm enough to follow us all the way to the final name in this countdown, then let's begin the trip. Number 10. 100 Steps Cemetery. In daylight, it feels almost disarmingly normal. A narrow country road, a simple sign, a set of concrete steps running up a grassy hill to a small rural cemetery. There are farm fields in the distance, a few scrubby trees, maybe the sound of a truck downshifting somewhere far off. It looks like every quiet resting place you have ever driven past in the Midwest. The kind of spot where you might even slow down and think, that actually looks peaceful. Nothing about this hill is trying to scare you, and that is exactly why it works. Because the story of this place does not really start until the sun is gone and the hill is only a darker shape against the sky. Locals whisper about a ritual that sounds like something invented for a horror movie, except the details match up a little too well. You are supposed to come here at midnight on a night with no moon and climb the steps one by one, counting out loud. If you reach the top and your number is exactly 100, the old caretaker appears and shows you how you will die. That is the legend. The part that is not legend is worse. In 1892, a grieving father had his daughter's grave opened so he could move her to a different plot. The coffin inside was upside down. Her body was gone. Newspapers at the time called it simple grave robbery, part of a very real trade in stolen corpses for medical schools. Try walking up that hill at night and not thinking about that. Try listening to the wind slide along the grass and not hearing another set of footsteps that are slightly out of sync with yours. Here is the uncomfortable core of this place. Someone once looked at that steep hill and thought, let us make it civilized. Let us carve neat stairs into the slope so people can visit their dead in a straight, respectable line. And history looked back and said that is cute. Then it piled on a missing body, a ghost story, and a ritual that dares you to test your luck. You try to impose order with a set of numbered steps and folklore comes along and happily kicks every one of them crooked. So the real question is simple. How badly do you need proof that some doors are better left closed? Do you truly want to climb a dark staircase that comes with its own built-in spoiler for your last chapter? Unless you travel with your own personal security team and an emergency room on speed dial, this is one of those places that is probably safer to visit through a screen. And if you think one haunted cemetery on a lonely hill is bad, wait until you meet an entire town that died from something no one could even see. Number 9. Hindostan Falls. If you drive out there today, it looks almost too peaceful. The widest falls in Indiana spread across a flat rock shelf. Water sliding in smooth white sheets, maybe a couple of people fishing and a kid throwing stones. On B-roll, it could pass for a tourism ad, the kind with soft music and a narrator saying the word tranquil a little too often. But the ground under your feet is holding a very different story, and this is where it turns dark. In the early 1800s, Hindostan Falls was not just a pretty stretch of river, it was a frontier boomtown. Stagecoaches stopped here, wagons rattled through, the hotel was crowded, mills were bolted directly into the bedrock. Then something invisible came up that river. Within a few seasons, people started dropping fast. Nobody agreed on a name. Some blamed yellow fever, some said cholera, others just called it the Great Sickness and pointed at the swampy low ground and the clouds of mosquitoes that lifted off it every warm evening. Contemporary accounts talk about more than 130 graves in a matter of months. For a small town on the frontier, that is not a bad year. That is a massacre in slow motion. Families abandoned houses with furniture still inside. Businesses shut their doors and never unlocked them again. Hindostan Falls did not slowly fade away as the railroad passed it by. It went from future city to empty silence so fast that locals later called it the first place God turned his back on. And if you walk down onto the rock today, you still see the proof that it was real. The bed of the river is carved with neat square holes where the lumber mills once stood. Clean-cut sockets now filled with rainwater and algae, industrial scars with nothing left attached, like a jawbone with all the teeth knocked out. Nature has been sanding them down for 2 centuries, but it has not managed to erase them, and somehow that unfinished job makes it feel even more haunted. Underneath all the folklore, this is a story about one very human mistake. People built their dream town right beside a breeding factory for mosquitoes and waterborne disease, like putting your brand new living room in the middle of a swamp and then acting surprised when the bugs show up. One bad pin on the map and a whole community slips off it. The buildings are gone, the families are gone, and only the rocks remember where the streets used to be. So imagine you are standing alone at those falls in the last light of the day. The sun slides behind the trees, the air cools, and the cell signal on your phone quietly drops to nothing. You hear the steady roar of water, and then somewhere behind you, a branch snapping that you hope is just an animal. How long do you really want to stand on land that emptied out in a hurry for reasons nobody could ever fully agree on? If a town wiped out by sickness already makes you uneasy, the next place on this list will not wait for disease at all. There, people started disappearing long before anything had a chance to infect them. Number 8. Aberdeen. On paper, it sounds harmless. A small farming community tucked into the hills, a brick school built with New Deal money, a white church, an old cemetery watching over the fields. It is the sort of place travel blogs like to call charming if they ever notice it at all. In reality, Aberdeen has already been moved to a different category. Local historians call it a level 4 ghost town, which is a polite way of saying there is just enough left to prove it was real, and not much else. Cass Union School still stands beside the road, but only just. The windows are broken, the roof is sagging, and the brick walls have that tired look buildings get when they have been empty longer than they were ever full. You look at it and feel like you are seeing the final frame of a film that somebody forgot to finish. No kids, no buses, no voices, just the shell. That would be creepy enough on its own, a schoolhouse waiting to fall in on itself. But that is only the warm-up. A short drive away sits Mount Carmel Cemetery, a little country burying ground with rows of headstones and a view over the countryside. At first glance, it is every rural cemetery you have ever seen. Then your eyes catch something that does not fit. In the middle of the graves is a dark, lumpy stone mounted like a monument. It is not carved, it is not shaped. It looks like it hit the ground hard and people simply built around it. In 1930, a meteorite around 100 pounds crashed into a nearby farm. The family eventually moved it here, into the cemetery, and left it among the dead. So you have a fading town, an abandoned school, and a rock that literally fell from space, sitting in the grass between the headstones like an uninvited guest from somewhere far beyond this county line. Once you know that, the silence of the place feels different. Less like peace, more like a pause. In a way, Aberdeen is what happens when roads and money go one way and a town stays where it is. The traffic shifts, the jobs follow, and the place gets left behind like an old file on a desktop that nobody clicks anymore. Except here, the universe added its own punctuation mark in the form of that meteorite, as if to circle the town and say, this one is done. So picture yourself walking through Mount Carmel at dusk, light draining out of the sky, no houses close enough to hear you, no real signal on your phone. You notice a dull metallic glint on that strange stone in the corner of your eye. Do you step closer and look, or do you suddenly remember you have somewhere else to be? Because the next place on this list takes the silence of a dying town and moves it into the woods, and whatever is watching there does not like being watched back. Number 7. Morgan, Monroe. By daylight, Morgan, Monroe looks like a brochure for the good kind of wilderness. Long walking trails, tall hardwood trees, clean air, couples taking photos with fall leaves, students from Bloomington coming out to clear their heads. It feels like the kind of forest where the worst thing that can happen is a twisted ankle and a tick bite. Then the road bends a little deeper into the trees, the traffic disappears, and you reach a small clearing fenced in by old stones. This is Steppe Cemetery, and this is where the forest changes personality. Local legend says that on some nights a woman dressed in black sits on an old stump near the children's graves, rocking and crying for a baby who never came home. People have claimed to see her out of the corner of their eye, the shape of a woman sitting very still, then turning to look at them. Others say they hear a child sobbing in the dark, even though there is not a house for miles in any direction. That is when the cheerful hiking energy drains out of the place and you realize you are not on a park trail anymore, you are standing inside somebody else's story. It gets stranger. Steppe Cemetery has long been tied to a group that locals call the Creepiest, a fringe religious sect rumored to have used this clearing for night gatherings and snake-handling rituals. Historians argue about how much of that is fact and how much is late-night exaggeration, but either way, the damage is done. The name sticks. The image sticks. A forgotten graveyard, a mysterious group meeting after dark, candles between headstones, maybe a coiled snake lifted in bare hands. You can almost hear the whispered prayers turning into something that does not quite sound like praying anymore. And then there is the silence. Visitors talk about an eerie quiet that hits. As you step through the cemetery gate, a silence with no birds, no rustling, just a stillness that feels like it is looking straight back at you. That is not the kind of quiet that relaxes you. That is the kind that makes you check the tree line twice. Underneath the ghost stories and cult rumors, Steppe is really a pioneer burial ground that the forest has been slowly swallowing tree by tree. The past did not just fade here, it dug its own shallow hole and lay down between the roots. The stones tilt, the names blur, and the woods close over it like a lid. So if you are thinking about pulling your car off that lonely forest road after 7 in the evening and going in for a look, maybe think again. Some places reward curiosity. This is not one of them. And if the idea of a cemetery wrapped in a watching forest already makes your skin crawl, the next spot on this list is worse. There, the silence is so complete because the town itself is barely there anymore. Number 6. City West. For a brief moment in the 1830s, people believed this patch of sand was going to be the next Chicago. Investors carved streets into the dunes on paper, surveyors staked out lots, and a famous senator came to give a big patriotic speech about destiny on the shore of Lake Michigan. If you listened to them back then, this was not some beach town experiment. This was the future. Now jump to today. You park at Indiana Dunes, lace up your shoes, and follow a trail through the trees. The air smells like pine and lake water, the path is soft under your feet, and the only sound is wind through the branches and waves somewhere ahead. A small sign on the side of the trail mentions a name that almost no one recognizes anymore. City West. You step out onto an open stretch of sand dotted with grass and low scrub. It feels like any other quiet dune, but it is not. Under that sand was once a hotel packed with guests, a street lined with buildings, a town that had its own buzz and gossip and arguments about money and politics. Then the panic of 1837 hit and the dream popped. Credit dried up. The government money for the harbor never arrived, and the neat little grid of streets on the town plats suddenly meant nothing. People took what they could salvage. Lumber was pried back out of those brand new walls and reused somewhere that still had a pulse. Foundations were left like empty sockets. And the dunes did what dunes do. Grain by grain, the sand slid back in, swallowing roofs and rooms and cellars until City West stopped being a place and turned back into a shape. A ranger once described it as a town that nature uninstalled, and that is exactly what it feels like. A program that once ran here, now completely wiped, leaving only a faint name in the system log. Underneath all of that, there is a simple formula. Big ambition, unstable ground, and no one willing to listen when the land starts shifting. You build a future city on moving sand and act surprised when the sand moves. That is not a curse. That is cause and effect. So imagine you are standing there on that ridge, looking out at a view that is almost too perfect. Blue lake, pale sand, green trees, not a single house or streetlight in sight. It is beautiful, yes, but if a place is this pretty and absolutely no one lives there anymore, maybe it is because the ground decided it was done with people. And if that idea already sends a little chill up your spine, wait until the next stop on this list. There, it is not the sand that swallows a community, it is the water, and it may have taken a few of their graves with it. Number 5. Elkinsville and Browning Hill. If you go back in the records, this starts out like a lot of gentle rural stories. A small farming community in the 19th century, families of Scots-Irish origin, church on Sunday, fields during the week, kids walking dusty roads to one-room schools. Nothing flashy, just the steady rhythm of people trying to make a living in a pretty valley that looked like it could stay the same forever. Then the 1960s arrived and forever met a paperwork deadline. The federal plan for Monroe Lake came in with maps, charts, and a neat little line that said everything in this zone would be underwater. More than 300 houses were bought out. 10 churches and 8 cemeteries were marked for removal. Crews came in with trucks and backhoes and started lifting entire lives out of the valley. Coffins were taken up, reburied on higher ground, old homesteads leveled. On paper, it looks like a clean, responsible resettlement. In reality, it felt a lot more like eviction. Here is the pivot. Years later, engineers admitted the water line was off. The main part of Elkinsville sits higher than the final level of the lake. The town did not have to die. It was erased by a miscalculation. And that is only the part above water. Investigations and family stories still circle around one question that never really goes away. Were all the graves actually moved? Some burial grounds were obvious and well documented. Others were scattered plots and forgotten headstones on family land. There are local historians who will tell you straight that a few of those early settlers probably never left the valley at all. They are just under a few feet of lake water now, with no markers and no visitors. When you stand on the shore of Monroe on a quiet day and look across that flat surface, it is hard not to feel like you are looking at a mirror laid over missing names. High above the flooded valley sits Browning Hill, a stony rise some people call Indiana Stonehenge. On the summit, big blocks of rock sit in loose circles, like a gathering that ended a long time ago. Hikers talk about climbing through the trees and noticing how the forest sound drops away near the top. Fewer birds, less wind. Just that heavy kind of stillness that makes you hear your own heartbeat in your ears. Local lore says there is something up there that watches the valley, a presence people call the Watcher, standing between the stones and looking down at the place where the town used to be. All of it started with one administrative line drawn in the wrong place. One number typed wrong and an entire community vanished as neatly as a sentence deleted from a report. So if you ever hike up Browning Hill and realize the woods have gone so quiet you can count your own breaths, maybe do not ask out loud why. And if a town removed by mistake is not unsettling enough, the next place on this list goes one step further. There, the stories about what went wrong are not whispers in the forest. They are written in police files. Number 4. Tunnelton. On the surface, there is nothing spooky about a railroad tunnel. When the big tunnel was finished in 1857, people called it a marvel of engineering, a proud stone gate that would pull southern Indiana into the modern age. It was long, solid, and built to last. The kind of place you point at and say, human beings did that. But some structures collect stories the way old rails collect rust, and this one filled up fast. The strangest chapter starts in 1908 with a man named Henry Dixon. He was the night watchman, the one who walked the tracks with a lantern to keep others safe. One night they found him near the tunnel mouth. His head was badly injured, his body broken in a way the local paper did not print in detail, and yet his lantern was still burning beside him. No one could agree on how it happened. Accident, attack, something else. The case never settled. That is where the legend steps in. People began to talk about a figure inside the tunnel that carried a swinging light and did not seem to have a head at all. Train crews told stories of a man-shaped shadow on the tracks that vanished just before impact. Hikers who should not have been anywhere near the right-of-way claimed they heard a lantern clink against stone and footsteps matching their own from somewhere in the dark ahead. Add that to older tales of a worker buried when part of a cemetery slid into the construction cut, and a grim wartime story about a soldier shot by his own unit near the tunnel, and you start to see why this place is sometimes called a narrow museum of bad endings. Locals say that on quiet nights you can hear the sound of a train roaring through the hill when the schedule says there is no train due for hours. Something is making that sound. You just hope it is steel on steel and not something replaying itself. Underneath the ghost stories, there is a simple, very real danger. Freight trains still use this route. The company that runs them treats the tunnel as what it has always been, an active part of a main line, not a set from a horror film. There is no safe ledge, no walkway, nowhere to dodge if hundreds of tons of metal come at you in that tight stone tube. So yes, Big Tunnel is creepy, but not in a way that invites you in. It is closed to the public for a reason that has nothing to do with folklore and everything to do with physics. If you are tempted to park in Tunnelton and sneak down to hunt for a headless watchman with a camera, remember this. The most likely thing to meet you in there is not a ghost. It is a train. And if that thought still does not slow you down, wait until you see the next place on this list, where the ghost is said to have an actual room reserved for visitors. Number 3. Story. On the surface, Story looks like the kind of tiny getaway you see in glossy travel magazines. There is a little cluster of historic buildings from 1851, the famous Story Inn with good food and wine, a few old cabins tucked under the trees. It is the sort of place couples book for an anniversary and city people visit when they are tired of traffic and concrete. But the room everyone whispers about is not advertised for the food. It is the Blue Lady, room sitting above the restaurant like its own private legend. Guests say the first odd thing is small. A blue scarf that was left in a suitcase ends up folded on the dresser. A blue earring appears on the bathroom sink that nobody owns. A lamp flickers when someone mentions her name. That could all be coincidence. Then you hear the rest. People who sleep there talk about waking up in the middle of the night with the smell of cherry tobacco in the air, the sweet, heavy scent of an old pipe that no one in the building is smoking. Some swear they see the reflection of a woman in blue in the mirror behind them, only to turn around and find the room empty. The strangest part is how consistent the stories are. The guest book in the inn is full of entries from different years and different people who do not know each other, describing almost exactly the same details. Blue objects moved or appearing out of nowhere, the smell of that smoke, the feeling that someone sat down on the edge of the bed when no one else had a key. One guest wrote that she heard slow footsteps cross the floor in the hallway, stop outside the door, and then nothing. Just a long stretch of silence where she could hear her own pulse in her ears. A small town is quiet enough already. A building where you can hear a single board creak on the other side of the wall is a different level of quiet. When you think about it, the setup is perfect for a haunting. The whole town has essentially shrunk down to a single inn that is still alive. After dark, there are no passing cars, no neon, no background noise to explain away the little sounds old buildings make. Every click, every faint tap, every breath of wind between the boards turns into a question. Your brain looks for a pattern, and the Blue Lady is the answer it has been trained to plug in. Maybe she is an echo of someone who actually lived and died here. Maybe she is what happens when a place is too quiet for too long and stories start to take up space. So if the idea of booking a night in a room where the ghost is already on the reservation list sounds like a fun weekend, that is your call. Just remember that here the haunted part is not a distant graveyard. It is the bed, the mirror, the space right next to where you are breathing. And if that still feels like an adventure, wait until number 2, where the spirit is not just passing through the room. It is the one people say stands directly behind the living when they try to walk away. Number 2, Poland. If you drive past in the daylight, it looks almost too pretty to be real. A small country church sits in the middle of open fields, rows of trees framing the gravel road, a few wind chimes clinking lazily on a porch somewhere. It is the exact kind of scene somebody would print on a postcard to prove that rural Indiana is still quiet and safe and simple. The problem is that Zion keeps showing up in places postcards do not. Podcasts, paranormal shows, odd little newspaper features. Over and over again, it is called one of the most haunted cemeteries in the state. Visitors talk about a particular kind of wrongness to the calm there. You step out of the car, close the door, and the world falls strangely silent. Your footsteps on the gravel sound too loud. Your breathing sounds too loud. Then, just when you convince yourself you are overreacting, you hear it. A low whisper behind you that does not quite resolve into words. The kind of sound your brain tries very hard to label as wind through grass. Even though the air is still, people describe long black shapes moving along the tree line, always just far enough away that you cannot be sure you really saw them. Others talk about dim lights hovering low between the stones, the size of a fist and the color of a dying flashlight, bobbing once and then fading. Carloads of teenagers swear they have pulled up at night, killed the engine, and watched a pale figure at the end of the church lane slowly lift an arm and wave them back, as if to say, "Turn around now." That is the legend of the helpful ghost, a spirit that does not want to lure you in, but to warn you away from something worse, deeper in the dark. It is a strange comfort realizing the thing you are afraid of might be the friendly one. There are rational explanations if you really want them. The cemetery is isolated, there is no traffic noise to mask the small sounds, no houses close enough to give you ordinary life to hang on to. In a place that quiet every twig snap becomes an event, and every flicker of light on a stone turns into a possible face. The human brain is not designed for that much empty space. It starts filling in the gaps with shapes and stories whether you like it or not. So picture yourself easing down that dirt road at dusk. Fields on both sides, the church and its little cemetery waiting at the far end. In your headlights, you think you see something light-colored standing in the lane just for a second before the beam jumps past it. Do you stop to check, or do you listen to the oldest instinct in the book and keep the car moving? Because if Zion is where the guardians still walk the fence line, number 1 on this list is where the land itself feels like it never wanted the living there in the first place. Number 1, Elkinsville. From a distance, the valley looks like the kind of place you would paint and hang over a couch. Soft green hills, dark forest wrapped around the edges, a creek threading through good soil that once grew corn and hay. On a clear day, it feels too gentle to ever have been dangerous. It looks like the exact definition of somewhere people are meant to live. That is the joke the land seems to have played on everyone. In the last century, Elkinsville was emptied for a reservoir project. Papers were signed, houses bought out, churches and cemeteries listed for relocation. Families packed up, graves were opened, coffins lifted out and moved to higher ground. Then the water came in. Only later did the engineers admit the quiet truth. The numbers were wrong. The main part of town sits higher than the lake level. The town did not drown. It was erased on purpose, by mistake. Somewhere under those trees and grass are the ghosts of streets that did not need to die. Somewhere under that water there may be a few old graves that never got moved at all, names no one thought to check a second time. When you stand on the shore and look out, it is hard not to feel that the lake is covering more than just rock. Above all of this rises Browning Hill, a lump of stone and forest locals treat with the kind of respect you give something you do not fully understand. On top are great blocks of rock arranged in loose circles, the kind of layout that makes people reach for words like ancient and ritual without quite knowing why. Hikers talk about climbing the trail and noticing the woods get oddly quiet near the summit. Birdsong drops away, wind noise fades. What is left is the crunch of your own boots and the sound of your breathing. More than one person has said they felt a presence behind them on that last stretch, as if someone else was matching their steps, even though they were alone on the trail all afternoon. Add a scattered mix of stories about strange lights in the trees, shapes moving that are too tall to be deer, and something people only call the Watcher that seems to stand between the stones and look down toward the drowned valley. You start to understand why this whole landscape feels cursed in a slow, thoughtful way. Maybe that is the real heart of Elkinsville and Browning Hill, a beautiful piece of country that keeps quietly pushing people off it. First with a bad bureaucratic decision that turned a living town into an empty label on an old map. Then with a ridge that makes visitors feel like they are being sized up by something that was here long before property lines and survey stakes. It is not just a haunted house or a haunted church, it is a haunted landscape, a place that never quite relaxes around the living. So if there is one place in Indiana that can make you want to visit and run away at the exact same time, it is this one. The valley smiles for the camera. The hill does not bother to smile at all. The forest does not speak. It simply watches and waits to see which of you will leave first. And that quiet, steady pressure from the land itself is why Elkinsville and Browning Hill sit at the very top of this list. Indiana is supposed to be the land of cornfields, racetracks, and cheap motels off the interstate. But once you have walked through these towns, you cannot unsee the other Indiana, the one where history, pain, and rumors stack on top of each other until they feel heavier than the buildings that are left. A pretty church does not guarantee a peaceful graveyard. A quiet forest does not promise you are alone. Some of these places look like postcards from far away and warnings when you finally get close. So which town got under your skin the most? The drowned valley, the haunted inn, the tunnel that still breathes, or the staircase that might show you your own ending? Tell me in the comments, and if this countdown made you look at the map of Indiana a little differently, hit subscribe and stay with us. The next strange story might be hiding in a town you thought you knew,